Good evening. We are so pleased to welcome you here tonight to the launch of Für das Kind, For the Child, Stories of the Kindertransport. My name is Abigail Beeman. I'm very pleased to be your MC this evening. I'm a correspondent with Global News here in Ottawa. I'm also a director with CHESS, the Center for Holocaust Education and Scholarship. All of the event organizers here tonight would like to acknowledge that we're here on the unceded and traditional territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe peoples. We recognize their historic connection to this land and the importance of their stewardship into the future. Event organizers also recognize the contribution of all Indigenous peoples on Turtle Island and the importance of building a relationship of respect and reconciliation. For the Child is a photography exhibit presenting the moving and dramatic history of the Kindertransport, the organized rescue effort of thousands of Jewish children from Nazi-controlled territory in Czechoslovakia, Austria, and Germany to Great Britain. It took place over 9 months before the start of the Second World War. For the Child comes to Ottawa from Vienna. It's hosted in cooperation with the Embassy of Austria, the British High Commission, and CHESS under the auspices of Mayor Jim Watson. And good news, it's not just about tonight. You can continue to visit the exhibit here, as most of you walked by, here at Ottawa City Hall until October 31st, and it's free. We're honored to be able to share these pieces of relatively unknown history with you tonight and reflect on their significance to us in the modern era together. And we'll get started with the chair of CHESS, Mina Cohn.
The exhibit For the Child, which we are launching here tonight, tells the story of the rescue of children from Nazi oppression on the eve of the Shoah, but it also provides a powerful and relevant connection to ongoing issues that today's students will undoubtedly recognize, and that is the lived experience and the impact of being a refugee and the consequences of hate. To encourage educators to reflect upon this important Holocaust story, CHESS developed a meaningful lesson plan that can be used in many circumstances, including students' visit to the exhibit. We already know that a few groups, a few teachers are planning to bring their students to City Hall to see the exhibit. On behalf of CHESS, I want to thank Sylvia Meyer-Gisbeck, the Austrian ambassador, Susanna Gasco, the British High Commissioner, and their staff for helping make this evening a reality. Special thanks to Hannes Mahor, Deputy Head of Mission and Director of Austrian Cultural Forum at the Embassy of Austria, and to Sam Kelly, Political Officer at the British High Commission, with whom I worked for 2 years to bring this exhibit to you. Thank you so much. And Mayor Watson. And to Mayor Watson, thank you for your support for this event. You have been our friend for many years and participated in many of our events and supported them. We wish you, on the eve of your retirement, a fulfilling retirement. Thank you so much, Mayor.
I am honored to introduce next Her Excellency Sylvia Meyer-Gisbeck, Ambassador of Austria to Canada. She's been Austria's ambassador here since 2020, and before that, ambassador to Algeria, Azerbaijan, and Georgia, as well as Director for Multilateral Development Cooperation and Deputy Chief of Protocol at the Austrian Foreign Ministry. I'm pleased to welcome Her Excellency to say a few words now.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mayor Watson, thank you very much for hosting us here. Susanna, Your Excellency, thank you for being together in this project, and Mrs. Cohn, thank you for your initiative and your devotion to this project, which is very close to our heart. Before I say a few words, let me also thank one of my colleagues, Hannes Mahor, my deputy, and his team. They were really engaged in this project. For 2 years we talked about it, and we had our ups and downs, but he really decided, let's do it, let's do it, let's do it. And yes, today we do it. And I'm so grateful that you all joined us here and to be with us to honor the Kindertransporte. The Kindertransporte enabled about 10,000 unaccompanied Jewish children to be rescued from Nazi persecution in Central Europe, including Austria, to the United Kingdom. This exhibition focuses on the Kindertransporte that departed for London from Vienna. And if you have already seen the pictures, you've got a bit of a feeling what it is all about. It is about all the few objects the children could take with them. That was all. Nothing more, just that. But Hannah Lessing will tell us more about it. She is the person who really can tell us about it. She is the Secretary General of the Austrian National Fund for Victims of National Socialism. And she came all the way from Vienna to be here with us today. The Austrian Foreign Minister and former Prime Minister Alexander Schallenberg pointed out one really important thing. Austrians and Austria as a nation have to acknowledge the historical responsibility for the crimes of National Socialism and have the duty to preserve the memory of the Holocaust. As a consequence, Alexander Schallenberg unveiled in the presence of the Israeli Minister for Diaspora, Nachman Shai, last year in Vienna, the Shoah Walls, with the names of 64,440 Jewish women, men, and children who were murdered by the Nazi. And this memorial had been initiated by an Austrian Canadian, Kurt Tutter, who lives in Toronto. Furthermore, the Austrian Parliament amended the Austrian citizenship law. Survivors of the Holocaust and their descendants now get their Austrian citizenship back through a fast-track procedure without losing any other citizenship. And I'm very touched and happy that one of them is here today, for Dr. Edda Magda. I had the privilege to be present when an Austrian minister, Minister Ed Stadler, gave her the degree of her Austrian citizenship. Thank you for being here. Several descendants of Kindertransport children live in Canada today. I just had the pleasure of meeting one person who just told us about the story about her family coming from Czechoslovakia. But we also have two persons here, Shelley Kimmel and Bryden Emily. They are Canadian descendants of Kindertransport children. And we are really pleased that they are willing to share their memories with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your words, Your Excellency, for really speaking from the heart, and also again to your staff and your partners and this partnership for making this event possible over such a long time. I'm now pleased to introduce Her Excellency Susanna Goshko, the British High Commissioner to Canada since September of last year. Mrs. Goshko is a career diplomatic service officer with postings including in Washington and Havana. Her most recent role before joining us here in Canada was as chef de cabinet for the British Foreign Secretary. Please give a very warm welcome to British High Commissioner Susanna Goshko.
And thank you too to the Austrian Embassy and to Chess for bringing this important exhibition to Ottawa and for inviting us to partner with you. In the UK, we are proud of our role in the Kindertransport, an episode that, as you've heard, brought nearly 10,000 children to safety. And we're proud, too, of the incredible contribution that the Kinder made to our country. But alongside this pride, it's hard to ignore an overwhelming and deep sense of sadness for the unimaginable dilemma parents faced on whether or not to send their children away, knowing it could be the last time they saw them. For the fate of those left behind, 6 million men, women, and children murdered. Exhibitions such as this one force us to reflect on the horrors of humanity's darkest chapter. And it's important that we do. It must never be forgotten. We must remember the evil and abhorrent ideology of anti-Semitism that was central to that moment and redouble our efforts to ensure that it finds no place in our or any society. This means being brave and not standing by, allowing ourselves to think that we can let apparently small things slide, because history teaches us that those first small steps are what condition us to accept the bigger acts that follow. We must remember too the risks of looking the other way and not standing up to those willing to dispose of countless lives in their quest to illegally reshape borders. We're seeing this today with Russia's appalling invasion of Ukraine. We will continue to stand united with Ukraine against Putin's brutal war. And we must remember the compassion and kindness of those who risked their lives for and opened their homes to those fleeing persecution. In the last 12 months, it's been incredible to see how quickly the international community has responded to the humanitarian crises in both Afghanistan and Ukraine. More than 100,000 people have arrived in the UK from Ukraine, and more than 21,000 from Afghanistan. In this area, our hosts, Canada, are leading by extraordinary example. This evening is about learning and about remembrance. It's important that we come together, that we remember, but it's essential that we apply those lessons to the present and to the future. Thank you.
I'm very pleased to invite Mayor Watson to share a few words.
Well, thank you very much, Abigail, and thank you for being our MC this evening. Bonsoir, mesdames et messieurs. C'est un plaisir comme maire de la ville d'Ottawa de dire bienvenue à votre l'Hôtel de Ville. Welcome to your City Hall, and thank you to all of the organizers for choosing City Hall as the site of this important exhibition. I want to thank Mina very much. She's very persistent. When she gets a hold of you and she wants to have something at City Hall, you better listen. And you did a great job pulling everything together. I know we had some changes in dates and so on, but thank you very much. And she pointed out that this is one of my last events. My term as mayor ends in 25 days and 6 hours and 12 minutes and 3 seconds, but who's counting? It's a delight to welcome their excellencies, and I know there are other ambassadors here from Switzerland, I believe, and Israel as well. I apologize if I've missed some of our distinguished guests who are here. I wish to also acknowledge, and it has been acknowledged already, that Ottawa is located on the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. I'd like to honor the land and the peoples of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation, whose ancestors have lived in this territory for millennia, and whose culture and presence have nurtured and continue to nurture this land. I'm also pleased, I mentioned, we have many representatives from different levels of government, the diplomatic corps, and civil society. As we all know, the Kindertransport was a series of operations to evacuate Jewish children from continental Europe to the UK before the outbreak of the Second World War. And the benefit of having something like this kind of exhibit here in Ottawa is that we're the host to 130 high commissions and embassies, and the very fact that we can bring together so many members of the diplomatic community, so many members of the Jewish community, other distinguished guests from different embassies together, is really what makes Ottawa, I think, a very special place as our nation's capital. And the extraordinary effort rescue effort rather, saved the lives literally of thousands of Jewish children, 10,000 in fact. And this exhibit focuses on the 23 rescue operations that departed from Vienna. And I'm so pleased that it's not just here for one night, but that we can have people who come to City Hall on a regular basis, walk down this corridor and learn a little bit about the history of the world. We have seen a 37%, prior to COVID, a 37% increase in the use of these public spaces at City Hall. We've tried to make City Hall more of a people place. So when I say welcome to your City Hall, bienvenue à votre l'Hôtel de Ville, I really do mean it is your City Hall. Because in the past, the only time people would come here, they were usually quite sad or angry because they were paying a parking ticket or their property taxes. Now we have celebrations that we bring people from all across the city and in some instances around the world to use these facilities as they're meant to be. Each of the exhibit's 30 prints shows an original suitcase containing the belongings carried by a child as they traveled into an unknown future. We could only imagine the fear that was in the hearts and minds of those children and what they were going through, and everything in their life was contained in one small suitcase. It's important to remember that in many instances these objects represented the last physical contact a child had with his or her parents. We are fortunate to live in a welcoming, multicultural society with a diversity of cultures, ethnicities, and faiths that make our city inclusive and vibrant. Unfortunately, anti-Semitism is an insidious form of hate that is on the rise in our communities around the world. It's important to remember and honor the victims of the Nazi persecution and to teach others about the perils of fascism and extremism. Today and always, we stand united against anti-Semitism and all forms of racism and extremism. In fact, our City Council unanimously approved an anti-racism strategy that we just launched 2 days ago right here in this room, which is a document that is not going to collect dust, but that is going to push us to do better and be better as a city and as a civil society. Alors, au nom de tous mes collègues du Conseil municipal de la Ville d'Ottawa, merci pour accepter notre invitation, and please enjoy the reception and the beautiful works of art.
Thank you again, Mayor Watson, and everyone here at City Hall who helped make tonight a success and a reality. I'm honored to introduce a special guest visiting Ottawa next. As you've heard, Ms. Hannah Lessing is the Secretary General of the National Fund of the Republic of Austria for Victims of National Socialism, and she's traveled all the way here from Vienna. She's managed that national fund since 1995, overseeing its various tasks, including the General Settlement Fund for Victims of National Socialism, which has fulfilled major tasks, and she oversees the Fund for the Restoration of Jewish Cemeteries in Austria. Hannah Lessing co-leads Austria's delegation to the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. We're very fortunate to have her share some words about the Kindertransport, its significance today, and the incredible personal connections she made with survivors. And if I may add, I first met Hannah Lessing back in 2014 when I was a member of a young professionals Jewish trip to Vienna, and I got to see firsthand some of the work that she did a long time ago now, but I can tell you that you're all very lucky, we're all very lucky to have her here tonight.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's wonderful that this exhibition, which is close to my heart, is opened in the presence of so many leading personalities. The story of the Kindertransport is an extraordinary story about the protection of life, a story that is both wonderful and sad, a story of being rescued and being banished from paradise at the same time. The exhibition for the child is dedicated to all those who helped tens of thousands of children, mainly Jewish children, in Germany, Austria, Czechoslovakia, and Poland in 1938 and 1939 to escape the killing machinery of the Nazi regime. The first Kindertransport to depart from Vienna left December 10th, 1938. The children had to say goodbye in the waiting room. The parents were not even allowed onto the platform. Over a period of 9 months, train journeys were organized by a number of brave people who brought children up to the age of 17 to the safety under the auspices of the Central British Fund. The children came by train to Holland, then by ferry from Holland to Harwich, and then from there by train to London, Liverpool Street. This was the so-called Kindertransport. Kindertransport, what a strange word. A word far too factual for a process that has left deep marks in the lives of very young people and their families. A word much too sober for an event that broke the hearts of many children and shaped the course of their lives so radically. Over the course of the last 27 years at the National Fund, I have had many conversations with people who owed their lives to the Kindertransport. These conversations were very moving. The survivors often expressed the great sense of ambivalence and conflict in their hearts. They felt fortunate to have survived, but they had also felt desperate, lonely and forlorn. Many of them never saw their parents again. Their fates have touched me in a special way. When there were more than one child in a family, the parents had to choose. They were allowed to send only one child on the Kindertransport. So as the chosen child, they often struggled to understand, especially the youngest among them, felt abandoned and thought that their parents no longer wanted them, no longer loved them. Later on, when they had begun to understand, it occurred to them, maybe they sent me away because they loved me so much. For the older children, the Kindertransport often meant a premature and abrupt end of their childhood. Thrust into adulthood, left to fend for themselves, and carrying a burden of responsibility and guilt for leaving their families behind in mortal peril. It is known today as the survivor's guilt. As often, the one child chosen to go on the Kindertransport was finally the lone survivor of an entire family. I know about this from my own family. My father, Ayre Lessing, also had to flee Austria at a young age. He was 16 years old when he fled to Palestine. He would never see his mother again. She was a widow at the time, and he was the only son, but she saved him by sending him away. Margit Lessing, my grandmother, was deported first to Theresienstadt and to Auschwitz, where she was gassed. At the National Fund, we support Holocaust remembrance and education in order to pass on the memory and help forge a connection between the past, the present, and the future. Children's lives are precious. Elie Wiesel once stated, "Once you bring life into the world, you must protect it. We must protect it by changing the world." Projects on the Kindertransport help build bridges between two eras. They can give people an idea of what it means for children to flee. This is particularly relevant today, when there are so many young and unaccompanied refugees in the world who have been forced to flee their homeland. Flight and exile are often extremely distressing for grown men and women. Many have been left broken by it. So what does this experience mean for children? For the most defenseless of all, the ones who need protection the most. It is during childhood that the personality is formed and the foundations are laid for self-confidence, self-awareness, and trust in others. The injuries from the early years are the hardest to heal. A broken childhood can lead to a broken life. Many children struggled or failed to build emotional bonds or trust in other people. I was talking to a survivor once, and he said of himself, "I have remained alone forsaken by my loved ones, awkward, melancholic. I'm a broken man. For the last few years, the National Fund has been publishing life stories of Holocaust survivors, among them stories of children saved by the Kindertransport. We're helping to preserve their memories, many desperately sad memories, but also a lot of good memories of the time before the persecution, memories of a happy childhood. Over the years, the National Fund has supported more than 20 projects on the Kindertransport, such as memorials at Harwich Station, at Liverpool Station, books, documentaries, and of course the Oscar-winning film by Deborah Oppenheimer, Into the Arms of Strangers. These projects are helping to bring the children's stories home into the collective memory. Some important projects were initiated by Millie Segal, whose dedication to the Kinder and their lives is really astounding. I would like to express my special thanks to her for creating this wonderful exhibition dedicated to children and their personal memories. After all, the world is a world of adults. All too often, we neglect that children have to live in this adult world at the mercy of the laws of the grown-ups today and then. One exhibit that particularly touches me is the clothing list from the Jewish community of the time, neatly naming the garments that children were allowed to take with them. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now living at the turn of an era. The voices of the survivors are growing fainter. With each survivor who leaves us, a world of experiences disappears. At the National Fund, it is our mission and one of our biggest challenges to give the victims a voice once more and preserve their memories for generations to come. The fates of the children and the help they have received back then remind us of the responsibility we have towards the children of today. I very much hope that many young people will come to see this exhibition, because today's children will be tomorrow's adults. They will shape the world according to these values and ideas. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We're very fortunate to have with us several descendants of survivors of the Kindertransport, and two of whom are going to share part of their family stories this evening. Shelley Kimmel was born in Montreal and moved to Ottawa to attend Carleton University almost 50 years ago. Shelley has worked for various Jewish community organizations in Ottawa, finishing her career as the executive director of the Ottawa chapter of Canadian Friends of the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, a position she held for more than 15 years. As a result of her mother's personal story, Shelley has been involved with Holocaust education in various ways, including as a member and chair of the Jewish Federation of Ottawa's Shoah Committee and leading the Ottawa March of the Living cohort in 2018. Let's give a warm welcome to Shelley Kimmel.
Thank you, Abigail, for that kind introduction. Good evening, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to thank the organizers of the exhibit for the child, which highlights an important and not well-known aspect of the Holocaust, and I am honored to have been asked to speak here tonight. I grew up without grandparents. My father's parents both died before I was born, but there were aunts, uncles, and cousins, a loud and loving family. My mother's parents and all her extended family were murdered by the Nazis, and I always felt a deeper absence on that side of my family. My mother, Anne-Marie, was born in Vienna, the only child of Elsa and Paul Klober, and I am only able to be here tonight because of the Kindertransport. They were an upper middle class, assimilated family who enjoyed all of the many cultural offerings of the city. My mother didn't share a lot, but I did have a sense of a happy childhood. Following the annexation of Austria in March 1938, Fritz Grunbaum, a close family friend who was a political performing artist and outspoken anti-Nazi, was arrested and taken to Dachau. At the time, he and his wife Lily were living with my grandparents, who then began to make plans to leave Austria, but they were unable to arrange for visas. Instead, made arrangements for my mother to escape to England on one of the first Kindertransports in December 1938. My grandfather Paul was a diabetic, and as a Jew, denied his life-saving medication. He died in April 1939. Following his death, and before the war started, my mother was safely billeted with a Jewish family near Manchester, and a plan was made for my grandmother Elsa to go to England as a caregiver to an elderly aunt of the family. Unfortunately, something went wrong and the plan was aborted, by which time there was no way for my grandmother to escape. Elsa refers to this in her last letter to my mother, writing, "You were the best child and you have done for me all you could do. In 1939, only a few days prevented me from being with you." It is heartbreaking to think how close my grandmother came to escaping. My mother never spoke about this, and I often wondered whether she buried it deep in her consciousness because she couldn't live with the knowledge, or whether she was never told about the attempt to rescue her mother, and perhaps was puzzled by what Elsa meant. Fritz's wife Lily and Elsa then lived together in Vienna, moving to a number of different apartments under great duress. In 1941, their attempt to flee to Shanghai was unsuccessful, and on October 5th, 1942, they were deported to Mali Trostinek, an extermination site near Minsk, and then murdered on October the 9th. My mother had arrived in England on December 12th, 1938. While most trains went to London, a few, including the one my mother was on, went to refugee centers elsewhere. She began her years in England at Dovercourt, a summer holiday camp turned refugee center on the East Coast. Shortly after, she was sent to Manchester, where she impressed one of the sponsors of the refugee program, who happened to be a prominent member of the Manchester Jewish community. He decided to foster her and brought her home to join his family. She became close with the older daughter, who was near in age and with whom she shared a bedroom. There were 2 other children, a son and a much younger daughter. My mother desperately missed her own family and wanted badly to become a part of this one. Unfortunately, this was not to be the case. There were issues in the family, and while she was loved and included by some family members, she was not welcomed or wanted by the mother, who treated her terribly. When she was old enough to begin working, she was sent to live with a spinster aunt. She found a job, began volunteering with the Women's Fire Brigade, and got involved with a group of young women who were organizing teas for Jewish servicemen. Enter my father, Herbert Wittes, a dashing member of the Canadian Air Force. After a short courtship, they were married in December 1944. In the spring of 1945, as the war came to an end, my mother made the journey to Canada on a war bride ship to meet her new family, as my father was not yet released from the Air Force. She arrived in Montreal at the tender age of 22, once again uprooting the life she knew and starting anew. The original meeting would have been anxiety-provoking and terrifying. Each young woman stepped onto a podium and her name was announced, whereupon the family there to meet her stepped forward. Thankfully, my father's family welcomed her with open arms, surrounding her with love and warmth and giving her the family she desperately needed. My mother never recovered from the loss of her parents and her extended family. She never spoke of her departure from Vienna, what it meant to her, or how she felt. And I'm not sure if she did not want to burden us with her past or was desperately trying to forget it. I am the youngest of her children, and I had a lot of difficulty asking her questions. It brought on such sadness, and I did not want to be responsible for that. After my mother died in 1995, my siblings and I found the last letter her mother had written to her, dated August 10th, 1942. It was tucked away behind the drawer of her bedside table. My grandmother's love for my mother was so clear in that letter, calling my mother her sunshine. She wrote, "I am willing to endure anything just for the price to see you again. In all these years, you have been my sunshine, without whom I wouldn't have been able to live." My grandmother's direction in that letter, to forget you ever knew the German language, really struck a chord. The only German I ever heard my mother speak was a lullaby she used to sing to me as a child. Throughout my life, one of the lessons my mother emphasized to my siblings and I was the importance of family, of being close, and of being there to support one another. It is a great comfort to me that we have been able to honor that value, as have her 9 grandchildren and now 13 great-grandchildren.
Thank you so much for opening up with such a powerful and moving story. I know we're all left richer for hearing about your mother's journey. On August 25th, 1939, Dieter Werner Ayre, son of Bertold and Minna Ayre, boarded the train from Frankfurt, Germany. He was heading for the United Kingdom. Dieter's son, Dr. Phil Emberley, who's also a chess member, is out of the country, and we are so very lucky to have Dieter's grandson, Braden Emberley, share his grandfather's survival story. Braden is a 17-year-old student at Colonel By Secondary School. Please give him a warm welcome.
Good afternoon, esteemed guests. It is an honor for me to offer a few words to kick off this important event. My name is Braden Emberley, and I'm the grandson of Dieter Werner Ayre, who's one of 10,000 Jewish children saved through the Kindertransport. My grandfather would no doubt be amazed and grateful that such an event takes place on Canadian soil, honoring a freedom quest that played such a crucial role in his life. Dieter, who later took the name Dennis Walter Emberley, was born in Frankfurt am Main on November 11th, 1925. The son of Jewish parents, his life in the 1930s became increasingly perilous, and his survival was no doubt in question. On August 25th, 1939, his parents Berthold and Minna Ayre took him to Frankfurt train station to begin his journey to Great Britain. Statistically, very few kinder would ever see their parents again after this tearful separation, and this was the case for my grandfather. Many of the children believed they were going on vacation, and once that vacation was over, they could return to their parents once more. My grandfather was 13, and as someone who's currently 17 years old, I can't imagine something like this happening to myself. Like many of my relatives on the side of the family, Berthold and Minna would perish in the Holocaust. Upon arriving in England, Dieter was taken to a foster home that was run by a retired British Army officer. Soon after, as a teenager, Dieter was expected to work, so he took up employment as a farmhand, working more than 16 hours a day. The work was tiring, and this separation from his family must have been very difficult for him. When Dieter was old enough, he enlisted in the British Army. This would have been around 1942. He would later gain a commission as an officer in the Canadian Armed Forces upon emigrating to Canada in 1948. As a senior officer stationed in Larg, Germany in the early 1970s, then Dennis Emberley played an important role in negotiating energy contracts during the energy crisis that devastated Europe at this time. For this, he was awarded the Order of Military Merit, the second highest order administered by the Governor and Council. A further honor was bestowed upon him in 1990 when he was recognized by Queen Elizabeth with Member of the British Empire for service to the Commonwealth. Dennis's achievements were a testament to the resilience of someone who overcame horrendous childhood trauma. We are living at a time when anti-Semitism is once again flourishing, when many Jewish people no longer feel safe, much like my grandfather did as he was growing up. As a high school student, from time to time, I find myself astonished to see my fellow students and the media we consume making inappropriate jokes about the Holocaust and the Jewish population as a whole. During these instances, I can't help but think about the hardships my grandfather and all the victims of the Holocaust endured. Later in life, one of my grandfather's favorite sayings was, "If we ignore history, we are doomed to repeat it." His words never rung so true. Today I'm carrying with me a messenger bag, which was the only item that my grandfather was able to carry with him as he departed Germany for England. It will forever serve as a reminder of the trauma that he and his peers experienced. I believe that as young people like myself, we must ensure that we never forget, that we keep memories alive of the trauma experienced by Jewish people so that we can redefine the world with terms such as tolerance, hope, acceptance, and preservation of human dignity. On behalf of my family, I would like to thank the British High Commissioner and Austrian Embassy for bringing this important exhibit to Ottawa so that our community can grow in its awareness of the trauma of the Holocaust. Thank you.
For some concluding remarks this evening, we are extremely fortunate to have the Honorable Erwin Kotler here tonight. As many of you know, he's the founder and chair of the Raoul Wallenberg Center for Human Rights, and he's Canada's Special Envoy on preserving Holocaust remembrance and combating anti-Semitism. Mr. Kotler is a former Justice Minister and Attorney General and longtime Member of Parliament. He's also a member of the high-level panel of legal experts on media freedom, Emeritus Professor of Law at McGill, international human rights lawyer, and counsel to prisoners of conscience. We are very pleased to welcome the Honorable Erwin Kotler.
Thank you, Abigail. I regret that I was delayed by being a witness at a parliamentary hearing, but I was pleased to be able to hear the last two very compelling testimonies. And I want to begin by expressing appreciation to the British High Commissioner, the Austrian Ambassador, their respective embassies, the Mayor, for convening this timely and significant gathering, a gathering of remembrance and reminder of bearing witness and the imperative of taking action, which is what Kindertransport is really all about. The first transport left Germany, as you know, on December 1st, 1938, in the immediate aftermath of Kristallnacht. The last left on September 1st, 1939. It represented a unique partnership, not only with respect to governments, but with respect to people, Jews, Quakers, Christians, united in common cause. Though tragically, the rescued children, most of them never were able to see their parents again. And so I would just like to close with some important lessons by way of one-liners. This is a group that does not need much elaboration, but using the Kindertransport, the rescue of the children, as a looking glass into these lessons. The first is the danger of forgetting, the imperative of remembrance, le devoir de mémoire, the duty of not only remembering, but always bearing witness, and as I said, undertaking the necessary action which the Kindertransport represented. The second is the notion and understanding of the Holocaust as a paradigm for radical evil and anti-Semitism as a paradigm for radical hate. And where the death camp Auschwitz is message and metaphor for both. 1.3 million people were deported to the death camp Auschwitz. 1.1 million of them were Jews. Let there be no mistake about it. Jews were murdered at Auschwitz because of anti-Semitism. But anti-Semitism itself did not die in Auschwitz. It remains today the bloody canary in the mineshaft of global evil. And as we've learned only too painfully and too well, that while it begins with Jews, it doesn't end with Jews. As my colleague Ahmed Shahid, the outgoing UN Special Rapporteur of Freedom of Religion and Belief, said in his landmark report on anti-Semitism to the United Nations, he said, anti-Semitism is toxic to democracies, that anti-Semitism is an assault on our common humanity, that in combating anti-Semitism, we're protecting our democracy, we're protecting our shared human dignity. And Kristallnacht, which is often spoken of as the forerunner for the Holocaust, we should remember that Kristallnacht, and as I said, it was a month later the Kindertransport began. Kristallnacht did not happen by accident. The first concentration camp, because Kristallnacht was in 1938, we'll soon be commemorating it, November 9th and 10th. Kristallnacht should remind us also that the first concentration camp, Dachau, was built in 1933 in a German democracy at the time. That the state-sanctioned incitement to hate began in 1933. That the Nuremberg laws were disenfranchising Jews were adopted in 1935. And so Kristallnacht was not just a forerunner of what was to come. Kristallnacht was the looking glass of how anti-Semitism is toxic to democracies and takes you down the road to inhumanity. And the Kindertransport is not only emblematic of heroic rescue, it also is yet another framework for the combating of Holocaust denial and distortion, which is metastasizing in our day. And I'll just close by saying that we meet today the anniversary, marking the one-year anniversary of the adoption of the Malmo Pledges that Canada, among other countries, adopted at the conference in Malmo, Sweden, a year ago, the Conference on Holocaust Remembrance and Combating Anti-Semitism. We pledged then, and we have to implement now, as a matter of imperative and action, the teaching of the Holocaust and its lessons across generations, of education about anti-Semitism, of combating Holocaust denial and distortion, and remembering always that when you want to understand, and I close with the lesson of what my daughter taught me when she is 15, she's now 40 years of age, she taught me the most profound human rights lesson I ever learned. And that lesson is emblematic of the Kindertransport. When she said to me, she said, "Daddy, if you want to know what the real test of human rights is, always ask yourself, at any time, in any situation, in any part of the world, is what is happening good for children? Is it good for children?" The Kindertransport was the incredible rescue action that was good for children, that was good for humanity. And when we heard the moving testimony of the descendants today, that should inspire us to act on behalf of our common humanity.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kotler. So pleased that you could be here this evening. And thank you to all of our speakers tonight, and a special thank you to the survivors and descendants who took the time to be here this evening, and for our two descendants who shared their powerful family stories.